Speaks Talk Radio, where women's words are changing the world.
Hello and welcome to Love Fools with me, your host, Terri Lee-Shield, where we are hopelessly devoted to exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you by Love School, where we explore loving self, others, and everything. Join us there for deeper exploration at www.loveschool.uk. Now for today's episode. Hello and welcome to this next episode of Love Fools. Thank you very much for joining me again. I've got a really juicy subject for you today. I was really inspired to do this show. And what we're going to do, I'll get straight to the point. What we're going to do today is explore the difference or the benefits or the red flags of compatibility, contrast, and conflict in relationships. So if that sounds interesting, come along. If not, come back another day when it does sound interesting. I really wanted to dive into this subject because it's just become alive in my experience, and that's very often how I find my inspiration to create content and things and share with you all. But it's something I've been navigating for a long time, and it's really, this dynamic is really key to a lot of the work I do, supporting other people and helping them find their balance in life, setting boundaries, understanding where the edges are of these dynamics, especially the similarity and where the line is between contrast and conflict, which is a really interesting one. So let's start with the good stuff, right? We'll start with what we're all seeking, what we would all really love to find, what feels great and awesome and exciting and interesting when we find it in a relationship. And that is compatibility. But this is also something that very often we can avoid, we can ignore, especially when our bodies get involved and you might quite fancy someone or you might quite like them, or there's that chemistry and that attraction there. We might avoid asking the question, are we compatible? And this is certainly something, hands up, I was really guilty of this one. Like, gosh. This was one of my massive big things that I quite like contrast. I'm a Leo. I don't know if that it resonates with other Leos and other fire signs, but I quite like to mix things up. I like the difference. I like contrast. I'm a creative person. I get inspired by these sparks of like, oh, this is a bit different, and it's created something interesting within me. It challenges a little bit or really makes me understand myself better, and to me that's part of chemistry, okay, is contrast, and that's the middle ground that we'll talk about in a little bit. But compatibility, that's like the magic stuff, isn't it? That's the stuff that allows something to go from short term to long term. And if we dive into something long term without compatibility, that's when it breaks down, when we start to get to this nitty-gritty of actually we're not compatible. So what is compatibility? To me, compatibility is being able to be on the same page, having the same values in life, appreciating and respecting the same things in life. It means having a similar trajectory or idea of where you're moving in your life. What direction are you going in? What's your goal? What are you wanting from life? What do you want to experience? What path are you going down? What direction are you moving in? Is that compatible? Our lifestyle, do our lifestyles align? It doesn't mean that like you have to do the same thing. You have to always be interested in the same thing. You have to always, behave in the same ways. But do our lifestyles suit each other? Are they able to work together to create some sort of harmony? And understanding that has been transformative in every relationship that I've had. Really respecting compatibility, seeing where we're compatible and different. You might be compatible with some people in certain areas, but not in others. And then that sets a boundary of this is potentially just a friendship or a work relationship rather than a friendship. Or, if it's family, you can often be incompatible, I find, with your family. And then that can be a real challenge. And that for me, I think was one of the reasons why I went along with and sought out on some subconscious level incompatible relationships, was trying to figure out how do I resolve this incompatibility. And then obviously the underline of that being taught, well, if you're incompatible with your family, you kind of, especially like, your parents and siblings, I'm talking about the ones in the same house, even your extended family, really, where you're supposed to tolerate that, you've got to kind of go along with it. You don't really have a choice but to try and make that work. And navigating that incompatibility and understanding it and trying to find where you can create healthy dynamics with that incompatibility has been a big challenge for me. And that is what's really transformed a lot of my relationships, is being able to identify incompatibility and then understand where I can set boundaries around that. We have a really, really great episode that'll be coming up at some point soon. Keep an ear out and an eye out if you're on YouTube for the episode with Julie Brown, exploring boundaries. We'll go into a lot more detail about boundaries if that's something that you keep hearing and you really want to learn more about. Julie is amazing at talking about boundaries, and you should definitely listen to that episode. That'll be in a couple of weeks or months. I'm still organizing the ongoing schedule for the relaunch, but for now, understanding compatibility and addressing compatibility in relationships will transform them. Especially in a romantic, or if you're in a romantic relationship, if you're looking for a long-term partner, if you are wanting to find something that's going to last beyond the initial chemical reactions. Compatibility is key. And I'll break it down a little bit from what I've understood from my own journey. And often this is what I try and address very much in the early stages now. And I'll go on to the other, like I say, the other aspects we're going to talk about, contrast and conflict, afterwards. So looking at compatibility, and what I found is the key, really three main important compatible areas of life that you need to resolve, understand, decide if you can or can't live with. You decide if that's in your boundary or not. And obviously that's going to be different depending on the relationship that you're having. Like I say, if it's something like with a family member, like a child, parent, sibling, those boundaries are going to play out a little bit differently. And again, with friendships, you might want to set them a little bit differently. But for this episode, for this chat, I'm talking a bit more specifically about long-term, seeking long-term partners and long-term relationships. And if you're in one and it's struggling, maybe this is some of the stuff you've got to look at and really start to address. Because like I say, we often avoid this big one, and it is a biggie. Are we compatible? And the three ways that I found to understand are we compatible is values. Values are really important. Our values are like, what is important? I've just said that. What's important to me? Like what is so important to me that it almost becomes a part of my identity, that I can't, if I live outside of that kind of behavior, or within that, outside of those boundaries, outside of that, I feel wrong, I feel off, I feel stressed, I feel frustrated, angry. So your values are kind of your guiding post through life, that your soul, your heart, wants in your life. And becoming clear on your values, your own values, is really important. And then becoming really clear on the values within a relationship. And when you're seeking a partner, or when you're with a partner, understanding their values. What do they value? And then how do they align? Are they compatible? I'm going to find an example. I really value freedom. It's one of my top values, is freedom. And no matter what situation I'm in, if I don't feel free, I feel stressed. I feel irritated, angry, annoyed. So obviously, it would be incompatible for me to be in a relationship with someone who really values rules. Yeah. If somebody is really, really highly values, say, structure, order, discipline, right? If they really value that, they're probably not going to be compatible with me who really values freedom. I also value justice. So I do respect boundaries and other people's boundaries, but I don't want them imposed on me. Some people like to impose their values, or some of the things people value ripple out to others. This is why it's really important to get clear on them. Um, so yeah, and so trust is another one that I really value. So especially considering I value freedom and I value justice, trust is another really important foundational value for me. I can't have a relationship with anybody unless I can trust them. And I've learned that the hard way. So if somebody is not trustworthy, if they don't value things that help us be trustworthy, like responsibility, like accountability, which are also things I value, but they're not quite as high on my value list. So what's really important is when you understand your values, rank them, and you can actually get some really great. There's a lot of stuff on the internet these days, but there's actually like some really great websites and stuff that will help you rank your values, understand your values. It's a very personal process, and it certainly was for me, and it's something that I had to unfold over my journey, getting clearer and clearer on them as I move through life and as I experience different relationships. So that would be, for compatibility's sake, look at your values, understand the partner or your potential partner or who you're in a relationship trying to create a relationship with, understand their values, and then figure out, are they compatible? Do they work together? If they don't, they never ever will. And you just have to accept that. Like, some values, some people are just not compatible. And if you're not compatible with someone, it's never going to work. You see, our values are core to our soul, our heart, our well-being. So if you haven't got a compatible value with somebody, you're not going to feel healthy and well in that relationship. And you're going to hurt the other person by trying to impose your values on them. So that's a really important one. So another one is life trajectory. This is really simple, right? Like, if you are heading in one direction and the person you want to be in a relationship is heading in another direction, you are going to go eventually so far away from each other that you cannot maintain a relationship, or it's going to be a real challenge. And you have to figure out then, in that case, if your life trajectories, if you've got so much of a connection with someone that your life trajectories are really opposite and you really want to stay with them, you're going to have to address that. Have a strategy for addressing what are we going to do when we move really far apart, or when our trajectories seem to move to a really stressful point. And this is the best visual. If you can't, I'm sorry, this is a visual. Obviously, this is a podcast. It's a radio show, but hop over on YouTube if you want to see it. So what I'm saying is, if you're moving in a trajectory and you get to a crossroads and you're going to choose left and somebody else is going to choose right, that is going to create so much of a gap between you that the relationship isn't sustainable. So understanding your life trajectory, like, have that conversation. Where are you heading? Where are you heading? Like, what is your end goal for your life? Like, we all have a vision, even whether we're not conscious of it or not. We kind of have this vision for ourselves, where we'll end up when we're old, where we want to go, what we want to experience in our life. Like, for example, if you're a homebody, if you're like, well, actually, I just want to be at home with my family, just have, live my life, stay in my local area, and that's me until I die. And then you meet someone who's like, I want to travel, I want to see the world, I want to live at the other side of the world, I want to move every few years. Like, that's a very radically different life trajectory. If you are like, I like simple things, I want to live really grounded in my experience, I'm not bothered about materialistic things, I just want to live in a small house that's easy to manage, and you meet someone who's like, I want a mansion, I want to be a millionaire, I want to have this huge house that we have to constantly be maintaining, that again is a pretty massive difference in your life trajectory. So those sorts of fundamental, it's a really fundamental pathway that you're on. If those aren't compatible, if you're not at least going in a similar direction, if you're not moving together ideally, depending on what kind of relationship you want, then it's not going to last long term, it's not sustainable. So that's another really important one to consider when you're looking at your compatibility life trajectory. The other one's lifestyle. So we all live in different ways, and that doesn't mean you have to do the same thing as the person. But if and sometimes opposite lifestyles can work together. So this is where we'll kind of move on a little bit into contrast. We'll discuss in a minute. But if your lifestyle is really routine, right? You like to do the same thing every day pretty much. And then you've got like a daily routine, a weekly routine, a yearly routine, right? And you stick to that routine. That's your lifestyle. That's the style you like to live in. You like to live in a routine, organized way. You are not going to be compatible with someone who really wants to have a diverse life, do different things every day, get up at a different time, go to sleep at a different time, experience different things, change their job, whatever it is, if they are not routine, it's going to wind you up. It's going to distress you. It's going to not work long term. So lifestyle is a really, really big one. And it's an important question to ask, like, especially at the beginning of a relationship, like, how many times a week do you want to see each other? Like, someone might be like, well, you know what, actually, I am really busy in my life, really busy in my work. I've got 3 nights a week I want to see you. Other than that, I can't really be about you. And you might be like, well, actually, I want to live together under the same roof, work together, do everything together. That would be the lifestyle I would prefer. It's not going to work, is it? You're going to get stressed. So that, just to recap, those 3 really important considerations are found for compatibility in a relationship are mega. Values, life trajectory, and lifestyle. So have that conversation, know your own, know who you are, what you are, and what that is for you. Set that boundary of what you will and what that means you actually can't accept in your life in a relationship. And then seek out someone who fits within that boundary and reject anyone who doesn't, especially early days, right? But let's talk about the really interesting, the juicy bit in the middle, the contrast. Now, some people I know seem to really want to find someone who's exactly like them. And this is what kind of sparked my inspiration to do this show today. I'm just going to have a little drink, one second. So, some people think or want to find somebody who is just like them, who has really similar interests, that lives in a really similar way, that they are pretty much the same as them. And that's fine, right? That's fine, that's up to them, that's what they're looking for. However, I love the contrast. Like, I am big on the contrast. I don't want to find someone exactly like me. Nah, I want to find somebody who has different interests to me, different ways of expressing themselves, different ideas. I like that juicy, fiery contrast. Contrast is very different to conflict. And what I've noticed is a lot of people who aren't clear about this, right? So it's about getting clear about this. Where are you with contrast? I seek out the contrast. I want the contrast. I love the contrast. I like the contrast. I need contrast in my relationships. Otherwise, I'm going to get bored with you. I'm going to get frustrated with you. I'm going to get bored with myself and frustrated with myself. Am I talking about externalizing that? I can't be in a relationship that has no contrast. I find it dull as fook. So I seek out the contrast. That does not mean I am going to find someone I'm incompatible with. Absolutely not. I will not be in a relationship on pretty much any level, unless I feel it's important to me because of a family connection, or we can set up a really, strong boundary as friends. You can have friends that you're incompatible with in some ways, but for me, in a long-term relationship, in a romantic relationship, I'm absolutely not going to be with anybody who I'm incompatible with. But I do want to be around, always looking for people with contrast. So that might mean that you think in a different way, that you have different hobbies, different interests. You have the duality. Where is it? The yin yang. Anyway. Sorry, I'm trying to point again on the camera. It's really funny. Yeah. So for me, I am a seeker of the yin yang. I am seeking that duality, that contrast that is productive, that compensates for each other, that is complementary, that you have complementary skills. You're a feeler, well, I'm a feeler. I need a thinker. If you're somebody who's really grounded, you might want to find someone who's really a bit more inspiring, or if you're someone who's really practical, you might want to find somebody who's really idealistic, so you can balance each other. So when you create that relationship, there's some sort of contrast there. There's something interesting, chemical, exciting going on. And for me, that's the good stuff, right? That's where the relationship becomes interesting, where you have to manage the contrast, where you have to find how to make them work, where you have to find that, really solid team working aspect of it. How do we use the best of each other? How do we compensate for each other's weaknesses? Can we support each other when one's up is the other one, if one's up is the other one a bit down? Can you support each other, balance each other, seeking that complementary balance? And having that difference can be really attractive. So then the opposite end of the scale is conflict. Now, when you can't handle, when you're not aware of, when you're not addressing the contrast, if you're not valuing the contrast in someone else, then that can become conflict. And what I've noticed is a lot of people will avoid any contrast through fear of conflict. Conflict happens, right? And I'm not saying you want to go and seek out conflict, but conflict generally comes about when we don't have the skills to manage contrast, and when we're not aware of incompatibility. You can, like I say, you can have contrast with somebody and be really compatible with them and not have any conflict, as long as you have the skills to manage that incompatibility. The the contrast, and understand where you have compatibility. Conflict is generally something that feels to a lot of people like an unresolvable difference. But even when conflict arises, you get to the point of there's so much contrast that a conflict arises, or something instigates conflict. You can often resolve it with skills, communication skills, taking different perspectives and practicing that in relationships, going, this is, rather than viewing it as a conflict, something that needs to be avoided, something that can be potentially, that we often get traumatized around conflict, right? Because we are not taught conflict resolution skills. But conflict can very often be resolved, especially when you preempt them. So this is why it's important to look at things like compatibility and contrast. A lack of compatibility will generally lead to an unresolvable difference, constant ongoing conflict, because you're not aware of it, and then there's core values here that are being rubbed up the wrong way. If you're then aware of the areas where there might be incompatibility that need to be worked on or addressed, in a relationship where you might not necessarily have a choice, if you're working with somebody who has incompatible, if you're employed and you're working with someone, like your boss might have incompatible values, like say a parent or a sibling that you want a relationship might have incompatible values, there's going to be conflict. So if you're aware of that and you start building the skills to look at the contrast and look at it in an interesting, exciting way. Well, can this have positives? Can this have positive outcomes for us both, where we'll both benefit from them? This is what's really important, to start to become aware of these nuances and slight differences within relationship that we can address. And knowing where you are in that. So if you are somebody who really doesn't enjoy contrast, if you're not like me, if you really don't enjoy contrast, then it is probably best in your best interests to understand that in your values, in when you're looking for someone you're compatible with, that actually you also want somebody who you don't have a lot of contrast with, because it's going to avoid the conflict. But actually, if we get really honest with ourselves, are we avoiding conflict because of our own insecurity, because of our own lack of skills? So therefore we're not being accountable for ourselves, we're not being open to growth and learning. Is it because of a lack of responsibility, where you're not being responsible for yourself, knowing, understanding what you're bringing to a relationship, what you're showing up with, not healing your own trauma, and understanding that sometimes when conflict arises, if we're afraid of it, it's probably because we've been triggered because of old trauma, and we can actually work through that. So the fear of conflict, the fear of that of any like confrontation and not being able to handle it, is something we can address. It's addressable, so that if conflict does arise in a relationship, and it sometimes will, and it might, and like I say, it's not the case necessarily you want to go out and look for conflict in a relationship. Some people seem to do that, or we attract it, but the reason we're attracting it, constant conflict, is because it's like, you need to address this. You need to be responsible for yourself as an adult in relationships and address why you cannot handle conflict. And that might be healing our old wounds, or learning more about ourselves, and gaining skills in communication, in expression, in conflict resolution. So I really wanted to put that out there, and I would love, as always, to know what you think. Has this helped you? Has this had anything that's really resonated? You thought, oh my gosh, yes, this is what's going on in my relationships, or now I understand that a little bit better. I can look at that and I know what to address. Let me know. So you can let me know. If you don't know, we've got a YouTube channel over on YouTube. It's loveschool.uk. There's also loveschool.uk on our Facebook and Instagram, which is only semi-active because I'll be relaunching Love School and stuff again soon. There's also the She Speaks page and group on Facebook that you can join. So if you've got any comments, any feedback, and you can message me through the Love School UK website. Just have a look at Love School UK and you can get in touch with me. You can leave comments, you can leave any feedback, and I would love to know what you think about this. Thank you very much for joining me once again, and I will see you. You'll hear me. We'll connect again on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Fools, where we have been exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you as part of Love School, where we explore what it means to love self, others, and everything. For more information, come and have a look at our site, www.loveschool.uk.